we have to on a Saturday morning. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded for those interested to know that. And this is the third of our public forums that we are using to help educate the town on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to achieve our goals. So Mark, thank you for joining. Appreciate it very much. Greetings to you from our committee. Our goal today really is twofold. We're going to share with you some information about what we're doing as a committee, and then to listen and gather some input from you at the end that will help direct our efforts. We have some questions on the last slide that I'll leave up for you if that might want to, jog some thoughts from you. We'll start with a presentation that will last about approximately 20 minutes, and then we'll open up for some dialogue. During the presentation, all mics will be turned off. If you wish to speak, you'll have an opportunity to do that at the end in the Q&A feedback segment, okay? So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it'll all work here for me. Oh, that didn't work. Let's see. There we go, share screen. You all see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Everybody's good? You can see that? All right. As for the agenda, it's pretty simple. We'll share a little bit about where we've been and where we are today, then talk a little bit about our strategy for the future, ending with some thoughts on how we plan to complete our mission. As I said before, we'll then move to a time of listening from you. We thought it would be interesting to start with a few facts, general facts about our town, although not directly related to the charter. It's just good information for people to know that aren't familiar with this, but we're approximately almost 30 miles south of Boston, established in the mid-1600s as an industrial and agricultural center. 28 square miles of land with approximately 180 miles of roads. 28,000 people live in the town, 17,262 voters, approximately 288 employees, a $60 million budget, almost 9,000 housing units, and 716 businesses. And our form of government, as most people know today, is that we're under a town council manager form of government, which some people call a city form of government, but you don't necessarily have to be a city to have this form of government, with our legislative function being done by the town council and the executive function being performed by the town manager. And here's some additional demographic facts about our town as well. So I see somebody else waiting to come in, Josh.
Yeah, I've accepted.
I'll admit them.
It says that they're joining. There we go.
Okay, so looking at some of these demographic facts, if we look at age and sex, percentage-wise, Bridgewater is almost evenly split between men and women, slightly more men in town than women. 14% of seniors 65 and over, and 23% of our kids under 18 in the town. The median income is roughly $92,000, which is $30,000 higher than the national average of $62,000. We have approximately 9% of the residents at the poverty level, which is also just about at the national average, which is 9.3%. In terms of education, 94% graduate high school, with 35% having college degrees or higher. And from a race perspective, Bridgewater is predominantly white at 84%, which is roughly 10% higher than the national average, which is 73%. And you can see the other breakdowns here on the slide. Okay, and now we'll take a little background on the charter itself, starting with some history. Back in 2007, a group of citizens filed a petition with the Board of Selectmen to start an effort that would study all aspects of Bridgewater's government. and make recommendations for potential changes to it. This petition turned into an article at town meeting. It was Article 8 at the November of 2008 town meeting that was voted on at town meeting and approved by the citizens, which then formed the Town Government Study Committee. This committee met for 3 years and recommended changing from at the time, the current open town meeting form of government to a new council manager form of government, also creating a town charter. The citizens of Bridgewater voted in April of 2010 to approve this new form of government, as well as the charter. And in January of 2011, Bridgewater officially began to operate under this new structure. So what is a charter? Well, it's basically a small constitution that enables a municipality to self-govern. Prior to having charters, towns in Massachusetts are governed by state laws or statutes, which means that many local decisions have to be approved by the state. Having a charter frees a municipality from much of the direct oversight of the Commonwealth and enables it to operate more efficiently. Because of this local autonomy, the citizens of a municipality with a charter now have a greater voice in determining local policies. Charters also have staying power, meaning that they can't be changed easily by local officials, like bylaws can, to cater to the issue of the day. It's no surprise that the trend in Massachusetts, as well as across the nation for the past several decades, has been towards adopting local charters. If you're wondering what Bridgewater's charter looks like, here's a view of the 10 articles or sections of the charter that make up our 29-page charter. I'll briefly go through and just identify what's in each article, just to give you a flavor for what's there. Article 1 is basically what sets the basic structure for our town. Talks about the town council a little bit and the division of powers between the council and the legislative and the executive branch. It also has a whole section on ethical standards, which all town employees and volunteers have to adhere to. And there's a whole section in there that on definitions. There's a lot of different terms in the charter that are defined in Article 1. So this is probably the shortest article in the charter, but it sets the baseline. Article 2 is really what gets into the depth and composition of our legislative branch, which is the town council. Talks about the powers and duties of the council, when vacancies arise, how these vacancies are filled. It gives some guidance on rules of procedure, how the council needs to operate itself. And this is where term limits are also discussed and outlined in the charter. So there are other things in Article 2, but that gives you an idea. Its main focus is on the legislative branch. Article 3 is an article that really just talks about all the elected officials in town. And as you may or may not know, right now we only have 2 elected bodies. One is the library trustees and the other is the town clerk. So this really describes how these people are elected, what the process is for electing them, and gives a little bit about their responsibilities. Article 4 focuses on the town manager. So this really describes how the town manager is appointed, what the powers and duties of the town manager are. If there's a case where the town manager needs to be removed, there's specific guidance on how that should happen. It also lists all the positions in the town that are appointed by the town manager. So this article is pretty lengthy and gives a lot of information specifically around the town manager. Article 5, this gets into the administrative organizations and processes within the town. It talks specifically about the administrative code and what that is. That's the document that falls underneath the charter. It really gets into a lot of detail on the procedures and policies of the town. It also talks about ordinances and what ordinances are and how they come to be and how they are approved. It talks about the town manager and how he or she performs department reorganizations. It also talks about personal administration, that function within the town, the HR function, and all the things that have to happen within the HR personal admin space to ensure that our employees are cared for. And then last but not least, in this article, it talks about the town attorney and how the town attorney is appointed, what the town attorney's responsibilities are, the fact that the town attorney is supposed to be an independent function within the within the leadership ranks of the town. Article 6 is financial management. So this is the article that really talks about the budget process, the capital improvement program, how we do our financial forecasting. Everything that has to do with financial management is in this article. And as you can imagine, this is pretty lengthy as well. The other thing in here is there's a whole section on audits. Prior to the charter being adopted, there was no real policy set forth by the town that required yearly audits. So that was one thing that was very important, that we have an outside perspective looking inside of our town to see how well we're functioning and what areas we could need for improvement. Article 7 gets into specifics around elections. When the elections happen, the details of different elections, the yearly elections, talks about what signature requirements are there for the different positions, how many signatures are needed to get on the ballot. And it also outlines the fact that we have 7 districts or precincts in our town. Those are driven off the census, and we have the ability to change the number of districts if we want. But that all is covered in this Article 7. Article 8 is a very important article. One of the concerns that people had back as we were discussing the charter and the new form of government was that citizens would lose their voice. This article was written specifically to give citizens that voice that they need. In fact, citizens now actually have more voice than they had before. Talks about the initiative process and petitions that can be drafted by citizens to make changes to our government. It also talks about referendum procedures, what citizens can do to get something on the ballot to make changes within our town. So there's a lot of good information in here. Again, the focus is on citizen participation. Article 9 was sort of a catch-all for general provisions. Things that we find in here are this conflict of interest a section that talks about, what conflict of interests are, defines them, and the fact that, how they relate to the different positions in our town. There's a lot of prohibitions in here too that focus on people that are being appointed or elected, the fact that they can't be discriminated against. People who are running for office can't falsify information. They can't commit fraud. There's a lot of things in here that are meant to protect our town from people that want to seek, office in our town. There's also a whole section on campaign finance and how it relates to, raising funds to run for office. This is also the article that contains the section on the charter revisions. It requires that the charter be reviewed every 6 years for potential changes. And there's a whole section in here, again, on posting of public documents. The fact that, the town needs to be transparent in how it makes decisions and the documents that need to be posted publicly before decisions can be met. Last but not least is Article 10. This article was specifically drafted to handle the transition from our old form of government to the new form. It talked about continuation of current government, so it protected employees from losing their jobs during the transition. It also meant that the laws that were in place at the time would not go away, that everything would basically stay in place until a certain period of time. It also outlined the town council and town manager duties during the early part of the new form of government. And the two things that it talks about is the fact that the town council had to prioritize their work to include developing the administrative code, as well as doing a complete review of the bylaws, the existing bylaws that we had at the time, and making recommendations to change them. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what's in our charter. There's a lot of detail, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it. As I said, it's 29 pages, which, isn't a lot, but it's good information to know. So that brings us to today and the fact that we now have 10 years of experience operating under a charter and the council manager form of government. As a result of the changes approved by the citizens back in 2010, Bridgewater as a town has seen numerous improvements in its overall operation, from strengthened finances to streamlined organizational effectiveness and processes. Bridgewater has transformed itself from what was primarily a reactive operational model to one that now focuses much more on proactive planning and decision-making for the future. The question, however, is, are we as a town where we need or want to be at the present time? I think everyone would agree that the town is far from perfect. We're continuing on a journey, learning as we go, discovering new ways to improve. So how do we know when we finally arrived? Although there is no real way to measure quantitatively the success of a municipality, a study was conducted years ago that attempted to define the characteristics of what a successful town government might look like. Many of the traits listed on this slide parallel what any successful business would strive for, which makes sense since our town is essentially a $60 million service enterprise with hundreds of employees, thousands of customers, and a professional leadership team guiding its operation. Although municipalities need to function with professional management techniques to be successful, they also need to be keenly aware of their customer base, both citizens and business partners. Since municipalities are primarily service-based, or our town is primarily service-based, our government needs to listen closely, share information openly, and treat everyone equitably. Building a sense of community by fostering and valuing citizen input is critical to ensuring the future success of our local government. So that the previous slide and this slide, are characteristics that we as a town need to strive for, and we need to figure out a way to how to measure ourselves against this. I had a meeting with our town manager about 6 months ago to talk about, how do we measure our success? How do we know if we're doing the right things or not? And this provides some guidance around them. We just need to be able to quantitatively figure how to decide how we're doing. So even though the charter has served us well over the past 10 years, it's the charter itself that actually seeks to improve itself. I said Article 9.4 of the charter earlier that it requires every 6 years a formal review must be conducted for possible improvements. The first charter review began in 2014. After 4.5 years of effort, the revised charter was presented to the citizens a year ago in April of 2019 for approval, but it failed to pass at the ballot box. One of the reasons this failed, or one of the primary reasons it failed, it was an all or nothing vote. And there were some things that people were for and some things that people were against, but unfortunately, overall, it just failed to pass. So essentially, we're still under the same charter that we were under back in 2010. The second charter review began this past June with this new charter review committee that is working right now, which brings us to where we are today. So this is the current committee list. We have 7 members. Myself, Cleone Mainville, Darren Boston, Thomas Golden, Janet Hansen, Steve Purcell, and Scott Pitta. So as we initially began to think about back in June and July, the work ahead of us over the next year, we needed to agree on an approach that would hopefully increase the probability of a successful charter revision. In terms of grounding ourselves, we decided that since so much work had already been done by the prior Charter Review Committee in 2014, that we would start by using their recommendations as our baseline, rather than start with a completely blank slate. And for comparison purposes, we would also use the 2018 Special Act, which included the Town Council's rules and procedures and state legislature inputs. So with the way it worked last time was that the Charter Review Committee presented their recommendations to the Town Council. The Town Council then took those recommendations and gave them to their subcommittee, the Rules and Procedures Subcommittee, who then came up with their own set of recommendations, some of which they agreed with, some of which they didn't agree with, and some of which they added. Those were the ones that actually got voted on and sent to the legislature and came back for the vote in April of 2019. Creating realistic expectations is important to ensure future success. So in this regard, we specifically want our focus to be on those areas of the charter that will result in adding benefits, such as improved efficiency and increased effectiveness, as well as fixing those key areas of our government that may need some additional fine tuning. It's been over 12 years since the last citizen survey was conducted by the Town Government Study Committee. This was actually back in 2008. So we feel it's important to gather feedback from the residents, given that we now have 10 years of charter experience under our belts. Lastly, and probably most importantly, is the need to modify the charter update process to replace that all or nothing approach with one that offers a little more flexibility and speed of delivery. Here's a view of how this modified approach might actually look, with examples taken from the 2018 Special Act that ultimately ended up in the hands of the voters. Using the amendment process, all of the miscellaneous grammatical type changes would be packaged into a general bundled article. And there's a lot of grammatical changes in the proposed recommendations. Spelling things, grammar things, syntax, formatting. There's a lot of stuff in there that is really non-controversial that could be packaged into a bundled article. The other articles listed here could be potentially included since they aren't contentious in nature. So there were changes made to Article 1, the definitions, effective time for measures in Article 2. The term of office for the library trustees was looked at. There are a bunch of financial changes made in Article 6 to the capital improvement program, and then as well as some of the general provisions. Things that we consider to be non-controversial, things that would not present a problem at the ballot, we think could go through an amendment process. And this amendment process is different than the special act in that it only requires a 30-day review by the Attorney General. That's it. Whereas the special act process has to go to the legislature, and the last time around it took over a year for their changes to come back. So if, for example, we wanted to go forth with the amendment process, whatever it ended up looking like, it would go to the Attorney General for 30 days, come back, and then we could get it on the ballot. The citizens would still have to vote on this, but realistically, we could get something before the voters in April of next year if we wanted to do that. The home rule petition or the special act method would then be used to include more debatable or controversial items such as those listed here. These were the items that resulted in quite a bit of discussion back in 2017 as the CRC and the town council were discussing them. But these could be put through the normal special act process and listed as a separate ballot questions to put before the voters. Again, we don't want to go all or nothing. What we'd like to do is put forward something that would give the citizens the ability to pick and choose what they feel is important or not important. Again, this is a very high level view of what's possible and obviously requires much more thought and due diligence on our part to understand and decide ultimately what will work best for our town. In terms of our high level plan, our initial focus has been on identifying and gathering data that will help guide our decision-making process. In addition to conducting a citizen survey, which by the way was just completed on October 7th, I think we got 114 responses, and holding these public forums, we're also distributing questionnaires to key town personnel and holding one-on-one interviews as necessary. We feel it's critical to keep the public informed and engaged throughout the process, as well as working closely with the town council as we progress through our recommendations. Using a phased rollout approach will hopefully improve our chances to get the most, if not all, of our recommendations approved. So that brings us to the end for a time of questions and/or feedback that you folks might have to help guide our effort. Here's a list of questions that might jog some thoughts that you might have. Many of these questions were also on the citizen survey. So if you've already responded to the survey, thank you for doing that. We appreciate the feedback. I'm going to try and leave this up so that it's visible to people. And so, so we're not talking over each other during this feedback time. please raise your hand and we'll call on you and turn on your mic. Josh, if you could kind of manage that, that would be great. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
So I'm going to try and leave this. I see we've had some other folks join since we started. I see Raymond, Adeline, and Francis, and Wendy. I see Greg and Astrid. Is that how you pronounce it? Thank you all for joining. Appreciate it.
And it looks like Francis has his hand raised.
All right, Francis.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, first of all, Ed and everyone else on the committee, thanks very much for doing this. It's very important work. I moved to Bridgewater 23 years ago, which still makes me a newcomer still. But there are lots of more people who have been added since then. Two things that concern me, and one is that we continue to speak about our population distribution in exactly the same terms that I heard when I came 23 years ago. It's not the same. And we, in denying that, we then don't acknowledge what other needs there are, how to respond. None of that gets incorporated. And so you have people living here who aren't engaged in the community. And there's always a comment about the disconnect. People don't get engaged, but they haven't even been accounted for in our planning. So I never hear that articulated. I don't attend every meeting like this, but I attend many, many town meetings. And so that component is fundamental to answering any of these other questions, in my view. The other is that although there have been many requests for ideas to describe how the town might be, what our goals might be, what the direction, I don't ever sense for myself or other people that those ideas are really welcome, that the consultant has already defined what it will, what things will be. And you might get an idea or two, but there couldn't be any real innovation coming actually from the community. For example, we've never, to my knowledge, offered a chance for our students and the adults in the community to sketch out what the town might look like, to submit diagrams, to submit models. I would think it would be a fantastic project in the high school or in the middle school even. What do you think it would look like? And then go from there. That to me is inviting innovation. So that's enough. So the population and the invitation, the real invitation for innovation.
Okay. Thank you, Fran. Appreciate that.
I don't know if you have any answers for that or any responses.
Well, I was actually going to ask you, I mean, on the first comment, do you have any suggestions on how we might be able to address that from a charter perspective? I mean, some of these things, and this is always the balance, is the charter is sort of a high-level overarching document from which, the administrative code and a lot of the detailed ordinances and other things in town are derived.
Right.
So if we want to put something in the charter that talks about a specific thing, I guess we need some help in sort of, framing that out.
Right.
There's transparency issues, there's communication issues. There are many different things that we're hearing from people about how people don't feel engaged for whatever reason.
Right.
And that we're just looking for ideas on how do we address that from a charter perspective.
Right. So I can speak from my own examples, but then what comes to mind are specific examples I've heard. One is that within the charter, we might have something general that says you hold regular community forums or something of that sort. But when it gets operationalized, we don't go where people are. we don't say to Roach Brothers, could we pitch a tent in your parking lot? People are pitching tents everywhere these days. So has anyone ever asked that and said, could we just talk to people and make yourselves accessible? I think you get a lot of feedback. But you have to be there when the majority of people are there. I've never seen anyone at the train station parking lot. You know, we have people coming and going who leave early in the morning, come home late at night. How do they feel engaged? Do they just come to their house, or do they come to their community? Do they live here because it's convenient or affordable? I don't know. I have no idea. We don't go to the marathon playground, to my knowledge. You know, I mean, you've got to go to people. They're not going to come to you. They've got other things. You're an optional activity. It's not a required activity for them. Childcare, grocery shopping, other things like that are. So figure out where to go. That's the kind of, that will make you transparent. You won't have to do anything else because people will say, I know how to get a hold of you. So that's just, sorry to go on and on, but that to me it's so simple, it seems.
Right.
And yet, unless I'm wrong, I've never seen it done.
Thank you for elaborating on that. I think I get the point now, and we can certainly look at how to weave something into the charter that.
Yeah, so I guess making the words mean something. So I know if you say transparency, I know that means you'll be where I'm going to be traveling or where I'm going to errands, and that then I can find out.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, France.
Sure.
Anyone else?
Looks like Mark has his hand up.
Hey, Mark.
And if you could just state your full name and your address just for the minutes, please.
Mark's still muted.
Mark Lindy, 56 Michael Road. First of all, I want to thank you, Ed, for going over. It's a very comprehensive presentation that you and your committee put together. It's really good information and it makes it understandable. You also didn't come up for air, so good for you. On the questions and feedback, I think they were great during the survey, and I was one of the 114 to fill it out. My question is on the more controversial, items, so to speak. Is it possible that when it does go to a ballot question, that there can be more than one question, not an all or nothing prospect? Like I'm pretty sure, from what I understand, being a newcomer, I'm definitely not a townie, like I've been told that one of the reasons it didn't pass is people didn't want it all, all yes or nothing. Like, for instance, like, should the councilors receive a stipend, and should the town clerk be appointed or elected, and then term limits. So that was all in the last question, correct?
Correct.
So is there an a la carte version for a ballot question, or would it all be put together again?
Yeah, I think I covered that on one slide. That when we go through with the special act, we can have each of the controversial items listed as a separate question on the ballot. So you can basically pick with, yes or no for each one that you want.
Okay. And for the outreach, you guys did a great job. I mean, I decided when I came to town I was going to get educated, and I went to a forum for the school ballot question. Fran and I were there at the coffee house downtown. And were any of these recorded for cable? And I know not everybody has cable, but do people have an option? Are these archived someplace, so if they couldn't get to one of the three, they can still see it?
Yes, I don't, maybe Josh can fill us in on how people have access to those, when they have access to them.
I actually do not know.
Okay. I mean,
We can definitely contact the town manager and the IT department to see how they share them.
I mean, just like the town council meetings, which are all recorded, all of our meetings are recorded. These forums are recorded and people can get to them somehow through the town website.
Yeah, they are posted on the YouTube page.
They're on the YouTube page. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks.
I think
Joe.
I'm good for now. I appreciate the opportunity for you to go over all of this, and I'm glad I could attend today.
Okay. Thank you. Francis, I see your hand up again. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I just didn't take it down.
Oh,
I
okay.
forgot to put my hand down. Sorry.
Anyone else?
Looks like Raymond.
Hi, Ray. Are you unmuted?
Okay, hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, Ray Jamian, 221 Aldrich Road. Just a general question. In the process of relooking at the charter, have you looked at some of the other towns that have charters in terms of how they have perhaps reorganized and how they've dealt with some of the issues that you have looking before us right now?
Great question, Ray. Officially, no, we haven't. I personally have reached out to a couple of contacts that I have at the state level on specific issues. For example, the whole term limit discussion, a lot of towns have gone through that already. So what I'm trying to do is get examples of what other towns have done in terms of, their term limit language and how they've dealt with that issue. But we can certainly do the same kinds of things for all of our controversial items, to get some sense of what other towns are doing. Yep.
No, thank you.
Yep.
Ed, it's Tom. And Ray, I'm going to have to turn my mic down, I think. One of the other things is a town north of Boston that is also reviewing their charter, and they're 3 months behind us. So they're kind of mirroring what we do. And a gentleman from there and I have been giving feedback to one another the last couple of weeks about the process, trying to make sure that we get the same level of involvement they do and see what works, what hasn't, to try to make this the best method possible.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Adeline?
Yes, hi.
Good
I know I've been talking to a lot of old time people in town. I'm actually new to town in that I only moved here 35 years ago. And I'm from the era of open town meeting. And a lot of the old timers say that they miss the era of open town meeting and the participation of citizens. What I'm wondering is, in terms of people feeling engaged, is there a way to make a hybrid between open town meeting and the charter? In other words, you would get the engagement of citizens through an open town meeting forum, but you could still have the management system of the charter, meaning the town manager for the proactive aspects of management and not have selectmen and a disorganized type of management, but a town manager, which would be much more proactive. You could have the counselors as opposed to the selectmen, but you would still have an open town meeting type of situation where citizens could come several times a year with articles and propose those to the counselors, and you would have the participation of the general public.
Thank you, Adeline. Great comment and question on that. So one of the things that we as a committee did when we were initially setting our goals, we did have a discussion about whether that was the decision-making process around, do we stick with council manager or do we go back to open town meeting? Did we want to consider that within our scope? And as you know, that would be a major undertaking to try and undo, what the town has already voted on. So we, as a committee, decided that we didn't want to allow that to sort of get us off track. We really wanted to focus on the charter and where we can improve the charter. If people are feeling that they don't have a voice like they had during open town meeting, let me just give you this information. So if you remember town meeting, we had maybe 2 of them a year. And there were times when there was a special town meeting that for whatever, but it was very few times a year. And yeah, a lot of people went, people could stand up and talk and voice their concerns. So under our present form, instead of having just 2 town meetings, we now have essentially 24. The council meets twice a month. And during the council meetings, there are 2 opportunities for citizens to speak. So now there's 24 opportunities as opposed to just 2. And we feel that, whether or not people choose to attend and take advantage of that time, that's another question. But that opportunity is still there. In fact, it's greater than it was when we had open town meeting. So I don't know if just this, it's hard for people to get to the meetings maybe, but it is certainly, in terms of the opportunity to speak and provide input, we feel it's greater than it's ever been. Now there is apathy, there's apathy in town. I mean, people just don't have the time or desire to go and speak because of whatever reason. That's a whole nother issue. But as a committee, again, we felt to try and undo what the town had voted on 10 years ago wasn't within our scope. Yep.
Not to mention, you should have access to your town councilor.
That's right. So we have a representative form of government right now, and each person in town has 3 counselors. You have your precinct counselor, and then you have 2 at-large counselors. So you have 3 people that represent you. And now, are all the counselors, out there and available to the citizens? Some are doing better jobs than others. That's one of the things that I think maybe we need to look at is some of our counselors, need to be closer to their constituents, understand what's going on within their precincts, what citizens' ideas are for improvements to the town. That's a whole nother subject that I think we can maybe address in the charter to allow citizens to have more access to their counselors to provide feedback. Good point, Tom. Thank you. I'm sorry, did I answer your question, Adeline?
Yes, I do feel that the counselors' meetings have not been stressing enough that the public is invited to attend, and that there is not a feeling of a public forum it's more like a small club that's there, if you know what I'm saying. Okay. And that does not invite the public to participate. So somehow the forum needs to change its atmosphere, its quality to become more of a public forum. And I don't know exactly how that happens, but it needs to become a forum such that those evenings become, in essence, more like an open town meeting on that weekly basis then.
So great response, feedback on that. One of the things that frustrates people right now is even though they have 2 public comment things on the agenda, they don't dialogue with citizens. It's basically a citizen gets up and talks, and then that's it, and they move on to the next citizen. And there's good reasons for that, because they don't want to get involved in, these lengthy discussions with citizens. I mean, they have a full agenda. These meetings go on for hours and hours. So they're trying to limit and maximize the use of their time. But maybe there's another solution. Maybe there's another way that we can provide that sort of two-way feedback opportunity for people. Maybe it's once a month instead of twice a month, or maybe it's once a quarter or something. But your point is well taken, Adeline, and we will certainly consider that.
And if I may just be so bold as to make a last comment, specifically what you're talking about when there is not that two-way dialogue and that feedback has led to people commenting privately to me and others that they feel that they are shut out.
Yep.
And that they feel that they make their comments and they're to no avail.
Right.
And therefore, quote, why bother to show up, unquote.
Yep.
So that specifically needs to be addressed if you want to get more participation.
Yep, good point. I do know that there was an ordinance put through, or a request for an ordinance maybe 6 months ago, that really had to do with when a citizen gets up and speaks and asks a question or asks for something, that there is follow-up, because right now or in the past, there's been no follow-up. People just speak and that's it, nothing happens. So Tim Fitzgibbons put together a proposal that required some feedback, either through the counselor, through the town manager. Whenever questions are asked, there is follow-up. Unfortunately, that ordinance didn't go anywhere. So there was an attempt, but yeah. We will certainly look at that and see if we can weave something into the charter that would require that from a policy perspective to tighten that up. Thank you. Great discussion. Anyone else like to chime in? No? Okay. Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. This has been a great time spent with you this morning. We appreciate it. As I said, this was the last of our 3 forums for now, but I think once we get our recommendations prepared and we can start socializing our thoughts with the community, we'll set up another series of these so people can understand what we're thinking and provide feedback on our thoughts. So Adeline, did you have one more comment?
I do. Excuse me, you said going once, twice, and so forth. I just wanted to express the opinion that I do believe that the town clerk should remain elected, and that it should not go to an appointed position, just because once again, citizens should retain that as a way to maintain control on that position.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Ray?
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking about what Adeline said, and I think she's correct. As much as people can speak, there is no, and they can also, if they have an issue, they can try to get on the agenda. But I believe the town manager decides on who's on the agenda, and thus, or no, maybe it's the chair. I don't know, but I suspect that a person that wants to get on the agenda, or a group of people that want to get on the agenda, may or may not be approved to get on. I'm not sure where they have to be put on. But in any case, her point is, the more I think about it, is valid, that people should have maybe I don't know, maybe a meeting once every quarter where people just speak their mind and they can get feedback from the council.
Yep.
But yeah, the more I think about it, she's making a good point. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. In a perfect world, the way this form of government is supposed to work is that if any citizen has, an issue or a question, something that they want done in the town, they should reach out to their counselor, their 3 counselors, and start there. I mean, and then if they're unhappy with the response, or they don't feel that the counselors are listening and doing, then they can certainly go to the council meeting and speak to all the counselors, all 9 of them. So there are multiple avenues to take, and I also think that the town council, you know, they've been around now for 10 years. Obviously, there are different people that have come and go, but they don't get a lot of training. And you know, I think it's time that maybe the counselors go through a whole refresher course on what it means to be a counselor, and how, you know, what your responsibilities are, and what you should be doing with your constituents, and how you should be, you know, doing all that. So that's something else that I think we're going to recommend that the council undertake to help guide them in their jobs. Now, they're all volunteers, you know, so they're all spending hours and hours and hours of their own personal time to help guide the town. We can't lose sight of that. But at the same time, they are representing us, the citizens of the town, and they need to, you know, do what they can to help that process. Any other comments, questions, Mark?
Yeah, just one last thought. On the agenda, I believe it's the council president and the town manager sit down and meet and go over the agenda. Also, for the public comment, the way public comment is set up pretty much everywhere is there isn't a response. Unfortunately, it was always something that frustrated me when I chaired the school committee at Southeastern and the library board in Brockton. And I know this isn't Brockton, but it's pretty common. What Brockton did as a novelty is the 4 counselors at large, the 4 elected citywide representatives, decided quarterly to do a kind of counselor at large session. It wasn't in council chambers, it was out in the community, and they met in a public school, in a public building, and they had interaction with the constituents. I know one of our counselors at large does that. Dennis Gallagher has like coffee with the counselor. When I first came to town, I wanted to find out what was going on, so I went and had coffee with him over at the Bridgewater Bagel, and I learned a little bit about it. And then funny, during the election, he had another one, and both myself and my opponent went over there and we had coffee with him and just had a conversation. So that was a great way to interact. I think people with Zoom now are looking into more possibilities because we haven't been able to go to the council chamber and participate in the meeting. There may be other opportunities that there was a silver lining in this cloud that we're all involved with. So I look forward to hearing more from you. I also would like to agree with Adelaide about the town clerk. I think it's a position that requires independence, and I'm hoping that that's not going to go from elected to appointed, because I think it would take citizens' rights away in terms of you know, having a voice. So
Okay, very good. Thanks, Mark.
thank you.
Appreciate that. All right. Anyone else before we adjourn? Okay, again, we appreciate your time this morning, and I hope all of you have a great rest of the weekend. And we'll keep you posted on how we're doing. And if there are new forums coming up, you'll certainly be invited. Thank you so much.